Hello everyone and welcome to Python Pune November month's meetup. I'm Bhavin and hello everyone and please introduce yourself in the chat. We will be starting shortly and yeah, a few housekeeping items. All talks are going to be recorded. Please post your queries, concerns, suggestions, thoughts about the talks or anything in the chat, YouTube live chat. And this video call talks, any other chat we have, any other video call we have are all under Python Pune Code of Conduct. So make sure you follow that. So we'll wait for a few seconds. We'll wait for everyone to join in. Right now we have few people watching us. So let's wait. For those who just joined in, we are basically waiting for a few more people to join in, and yeah, we are introducing ourselves in the channel. Uh, um, Remember that this is a public chat, so this will be saved on YouTube. So yeah. If there is a noise from my side, sorry about that. I can't do anything about it. So yeah. Okay, let's get started then. So, for those who are new to Python Pune, let me talk about it a bit. So, whoever new to Python Pune, so we are basically a group of people who have been conducting meetups since last around 6 years now, and we try to create a platform for everyone to talk about Python. Even if you have tried like a new library or you have wrote your first code in Python, you are always welcome to give a talk. We always want to make sure that this is a platform for everyone to talk about Python and it is open to all. And yeah, every month what we do is we collect few links from our meetup members, group members basically, and we try to compile a newsletter out of it. So this will have interesting news people have been reading about Python, any events coming up, any new projects coming up and all. So yeah, Chandan will be talking about, and what we do is talking about the newsletter, and what we do is we try to pick up one tool or some technology out of that received links, and we try to talk about it in the beginning of the meetup. So over to you, Chandan. You can share your screen and we can talk about whatever you have. Chandan, you are on mute.
Thank you, Bhavin. Let me share my screen quickly. Bhavin, can you confirm does my screen is visible?
Here, screen is visible. Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Is it visible?
Yes, yes, it is
Okay.
visible.
So welcome to another edition of Python Pune Community Newsletter. As Bhavin already said that we collect the links from Twitter, social media platforms, as well as planets and some blogs. And different volunteers tries to put those links within the GitHub resource. And from that, we create the newsletters. So it's basically a collection of all the news and activity happened this month. So what I am going to do, I am going to take a look at new project which I have decided to take a look on pipchill. Uh, so it's written by R. Banfi. Yeah. Let me first pass. Uh, let me. So it's a Python module, and as per the description says, like it is a more relaxed pip freeze. So let me talk a little bit about pip. So we use pip to install any Python packages from PyPI server, and on pypi.org, all the packages are generally posted and stored, and anyone can install it locally while developing or writing their application using pip. So let me do. What pipchill is, we will take a look into this.
Yeah, Chandan, can
So
you increase the font
let me
size?
open the documentation. Uh, uh, and then we will talk in detail. So since it's a new library,
Chandan, can you increase the font size?
let me increase the font
Yeah.
for this one also.
Yeah,
Since
yeah.
it's a new library, I do not want to pollute my system. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a virtual env. I'm going to name is like VNV name as meetup. Basically, I'm already using Python 3. So I'm going to activate this uh, meetup virtual env. And so as I was saying, we use pip to install a package. So like suppose I want to install pip install request. So it will install request on my local system in this virtual env. And if I do pip list, if you can see, you can get the list of all the dependencies of request as well as request is installed. Let me install some other packages. Let's, for example, pip install Flask. Okay, so Flask is also installed. So when we work on a new project, like, and we use so many third-party dependencies. So when we zip it or push it on GitHub, we try to create a requirement.txt file so that like others user can use that requirement.txt file and set up their development environment or the production environment. So in order to create a requirement.txt file, what we use is like we use pfreeze and we std out those I put to like requirement.txt. Okay, something like this. Let me cat it. So if you see that, and I have just installed two dependencies, but in requirement.txt it is showing 11, which is kind of not good. So here comes the pipchill. So let me first install the pipchill. So since it's available on PyPI servers, we can use the pip command to install pipchill. Okay. So right now in this virtual env, we have installed three dependencies. For using pipchill, we can just use pipchill command. And I am going to create a new requirement.txt by stdoing out its output and giving a different name so that like we do not get confused. Okay. Now let's do cat chill and check the numbers. Oh, it's 3. This is what we need. So what pipchill is doing, basically it's trying to list only those dependencies which you have actually installed, not all the dependencies of the request or the Flask or the pipchill.
So this is
So it's
like
a very handy tool which you can use.
dependencies of
I
dependencies,
tried to
right?
cover all the things which is given in the documentation, and please have a look. I will pass these links on the YouTube chat. That's it from my side. Thank you, Avin. Over to you.
Cool. Thank you, Chandan. So basically, it's like dependencies of dependencies are not included in pipchill's output. This is basically what you install, and those tool will basically decide what they want as their dependencies, right? So if I install Flask, Flask will decide what to pull in as their dependencies. Yeah, interesting. So there is a slight change in the schedule, our agenda. So next up, we will be having talk by AP Rajshekhar, which is structural design patterns in Python. And Amit, our next speaker had some issues, so he won't be able to deliver the talk. So we will be having his talk in next meetup. So once we are done with the current talk, we'll directly move to our hangout room where we can chat over video call. So yeah, over to you, AP. You can share your screen and we can get started.
Thank you. So let me share my screen. Please tell me when it comes up.
Yep. Yep, it is visible.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, and thank you for joining this talk. Uh, so this is for those who have attended the previous one. This is the second in series of design patterns and Python. I had delivered a previous one on the basics of design patterns and the first aspect of design pattern, that is constructional design patterns. So this time we'll be talking about structural design patterns. So agenda would be a little bit about me, then what design patterns are in a nutshell, so that we can have a refresher course cliff notes version of what we had discussed last time. Then structural patterns, introduction to it, an overview of facade pattern, and the steps that is required in implementing a facade pattern. Next would be proxy pattern, an overview of it. Then we will move on to implementing it and the Q&A. So let's get started. So about me, I am a PhD at Red Hat. I am a generalist. That means I don't have a specific platform or specific language that I would say I am narrowed down to. I would say I have up to medium knowledge of almost all platforms and all languages. I have authored 2 books. One is web development using Ruby on Rails. Another is the .NET 4.5 Experts Cookbook. Both have been published by PACT. I had authored 60 plus articles for the now defunct DevShed portal with a readership of more than 5 million at that time when it went offline. I have been a contributor to Crane project and GameDora. Both of them are available on GitHub. So if you want to contact me, these are my contact details. Let's start on to the main agenda. So what are design patterns? It was first introduced by Geoff, known as Gang of Four. What they found was that every carpenter has certain patterns that they use to create house. So why don't we just add it to software development? And that's how design patterns came into picture. They are general, reusable solution to commonly occurring problems. Again, the thing is that when we develop something, there are certain steps that gets reused. There are certain steps that problems that always come up. How do you initialize an object? How do you make 2 objects work together in such a way that the client doesn't know there are 2 objects working inside? So these are the general issues. So design patterns deals with it. They are the formalized best practices. So each kind of issue has a best practice. Now when they get formalized, they become part of the design patterns. How they are described is It describes the problem, the solution, when to apply solution, and its consequences. Every design pattern has a consequence. Please keep that in mind. They are classified by intent, what they do. That is creation, structure, and behavior. How do you create an object? How do you structurally compose an object? And how do you make objects behave as you want? They are language neutral. That means you can implement whatever you're discussing today for Python is implementable for Java, it is implementable for Go, it is implementable for C, C++. There is no specificity in which language it can be implemented. And please keep in mind, not all problems require design patterns. Think of design patterns as a hammer, but don't consider all problems as nail. So what are structural patterns? They are concerned with how classes and objects can be composed to form larger structures. So let's say you are working on a project. You have two main objects or classes, one that deals with user data from LMS, another that deals user data from your LDAP. Now you have the issue that how do you present this data in such a way to the user that user doesn't need to know from where this data is coming. That's a structural problem, because you have two objects which you want to combine to present the user. I'm using user as just a generic term. The specific term would be client. There are two main dominant parts of it. First is simplifying the structure, how you are creating an application. So let's say you are the client of that particular API. What would you like more? Having just one simplified API that would give you both the data, or do you want to call both manually? That is why we are saying simplifying the structure. Identify the relationship between classes and object. Whether the classes are inherited, that would solve the problem, or should we use instance of two classes together, two objects together, so that creates the simplified solution. This is what structural patterns talk about. How they are classified into. So whenever you look at structural patterns, there will be majorly divided into two parts. First is object composition pattern. Like I just said, you have two instances of data source. How are you going to combine them and present it to client? Then there are class inheritance patterns. So let's take, there is a particular class which you don't want to expose to the client, but you want to provide all its functionalities and extend certain functionalities of it. That in such cases, you use the class inheritance patterns of structural patterns. So facade, proxy, and bridge come into the first, that is object composition pattern. Adapters come into second, that is class inheritance pattern. Now, what is a facade pattern? So every design pattern has two main parts, that is the intent, and second, how you are going to use. Apart from whatever I had described as the official document of a pattern. So we will be going with these intent and usages for facade pattern as well as proxy pattern. So intent is provide a unified interface to set of interfaces in a system or subset of subsystems. So let's take again example of a large enterprise and user profile data. User profile is the system, and the subsystems are LMS user profile, LDAP user profile, even SSO based user profile, which may be going into Google or whatever is there. Now, how would you provide a unified interface so that the client doesn't need to go and call each system individually? Define a higher level interface that makes subsystems easier to use. Again, I have three different systems. What is the best way so that I can just create an instance of one of them and get data from all others? Wrap a complicated subsystem with a simple interface. Let's take example of LDAP. Now, in order to get data from LDAP, you have to have certain steps that you need to do. How would you make it so that the client doesn't need to know all the steps? Just provide the username and password and client gets what data he or she needs. That's what wrapping a complicated subsystem into a simpler interface. Do not hide away the subsystem. Now, this is a major part. Even though facade pattern provides you a way to interact with your subsystems in a very simple manner, it doesn't hide away. That means if client wants to directly make a call to, let's say, CMS data store, he or she would be able to do it. The particular program should be able to do it. So it is not, it is providing a layer of abstraction, but it is not hiding away anything. Please keep that in mind. So where do you use it? Common usages are report aggregation, user data aggregation, just like I just described, and subsystem interfacing. Best example is LDAP that I have seen till now. Or if you want to take more generic approach, your laptop, you have a keyboard. How does it work? There are multiple parts of it, but you are providing a unified interface to each of it. Or a better approach answer would be your device manager within whichever DE you are using, where you can go and look at each individual thing, or you can just search for them via the device interface manager itself. So how do you implement a facade pattern? What you need here is, first you have to identify the systems that you want to provide facade for. And this is very important step. One main part of structural patterns is that you don't use structural patterns. Most of the time you don't use them when you start implementing a project. You use them as your project grows. So unless you have identified the systems or subsystems that you want to provide a gateway or simplified interface to, you don't need to even think about facade pattern. But let's say you have growing subsystems and you want to make the life of your developers, your clients easier. Then you start thinking of facade pattern, and that is where you define the system. So for example, let's say, again, take example of the user data. Initially, you only had one place, that is a CMS. So you didn't need to create anything. You would just, client can just make direct call to the API provided by CMS. But you added one more data source, that is the LMS. So now rather than asking the client to call it from their end, you can provide a simplified version of API, which internally makes calls to these to and provide the data. So that is defining the system. So in this case, the systems are LMS and the CMS. Second is define the facade. So the simplified API that you're providing to your client is a facade. It would have references to the systems the facade is providing interface into. So every facade will be holding references to the subsystems that it is creating a gateway to. Third is define the client. Now, when you say define the client, it is basically how the client can call the simplified API, whether or not you want to provide, in what way you can tell the client that they can actually go and call the subsystems directly or not. This comes, I would say, majorly under documentation rather than actual code, because each and every client can implement a different way. But defining a client means providing a contract to the client saying that this is how you can call this facade and this is what the data that you will be getting back from the facade. So how would you do that in Python? First is, let's define the system. In this case, user profile. And since there are multiple user profiles, we will be making it abstract. And there will be one main method each user profile system would be using, that is the get data. So next, how would you, continuing with the defining the system, let's inherit and implement the abstract. So for the sake of brevity, CMS user is the class, and it just prints it overrides the get data, prints getting data from CMS, and LMS user inherits from user profile again, overrides the get data and prints getting data from LMS. Now, the facade. So we are creating a class called user data provider. So what it will do is that it will hold references to both kinds of subsystems it is wrapping up. So CMS user as well as LMS user. Then it would provide, so this is one of the ways. It would either provide ways to like get CMS user and get LMS user. You can even have just one, says that get user data, and then merge these two together. That is also possible. But in this case, for simplicity, what we have done is that def get CMS user and def get LMS user, which internally will provide the CMS and LMS user data. And in this case, the client doesn't need to know which classes needs to be called to get the CMS user data or the LMS user data. How does the client look like in this case? So in this case, the client would adhere to the contract. That is, it will call the user data provider, create an instance of it, and then start calling the methods that it want to use. Now, as I initially told, in the facade pattern, it only creates a easier view of calling onto the subsystems, and it does not hide away the actual subsystem itself. So in this case, the client can even directly create an instance of LMS user and call it get data, if that's what the client wants. So that concludes the facade pattern. Please tell me if I'm going too fast. Now moving on to proxy pattern. Now this is proxy is a very interesting pattern, because proxy, when you say proxy, you think of very simplified view, a proxy to another system. However, there are multiple kinds of proxies that you can use in the real world. So the intent is to represent a complex system in simpler way. This looks similar to what we have seen for facade pattern. So most of the structural patterns will have this intent with, that is to represent a complex system in a simplified way. But how does each of these patterns do it, and when you should use it differs. Now how does proxy pattern simplifies the way is that it provides a surrogate or a placeholder for another object to control access to it. So rather than providing a way to the interface, it will actually provide a surrogate. Means you wouldn't even know that it is a surrogate of something else. That's the specialty of proxy. Use an extra level of interaction to support distributed control and intelligence. Facade doesn't have this intelligence. If you look at how facade patterns are implemented, they are just simplified way of giving access to the subsystems, making that getting data from the subsystems easily. However, for proxy, it has this added intelligence. That means a proxy can implement authorization, it can implement or access control, it can even create objects on the fly based on the request that comes from the client. And based on this, whatever I have told you, there are multiple types of proxies. You have a virtual proxy. Virtual proxy is for resources which take too much to load. For example, let's say there is a source report on the server, and it has been extracted. But every time, if you have to go through it and see what all files are there, it will take a long time. So you can create a proxy for that particular source report with all the details that is there. And instead of running through it every time a request comes, you will just use the proxy and say, okay, these are the things that are there in the source report. That's the virtual proxy. Second is a remote proxy. Remote proxy is a proxy for remote objects. For example, you want to connect to SSH. There is a particular data that you want to access, a file that you want to access. What the proxy would do is that it would do all the connection, accessing the data, everything for you, and you will only see the class, the proxy, and you wouldn't even know that it is accessing a remote object. Third is a protective proxy. This is something akin to SU, pseudo users, you can say. You want to run a command. on a particular, let's say you want to execute an API. Now, unless you have certain privileges, you shouldn't be able to access the admin data. And in such a case, the API can actually do the authorization and say that since you don't have admin privileges, you can't access these kind of data and return everything back to you. That is known as protective proxy. Last is the smart proxy. Now, smart proxy are also known as dynamic proxies in some cases. So what smart proxy does is, let's say you have 5 classes and you don't know which class object would be required by the client. What smart proxy essentially does is that based on the client's requirement, it creates a reference to that particular class, gives it to the client. Client does everything, and once client usage is done, it just destroys it. Client wouldn't even know that it was working with a proxy. Now, what are the common usages? Remote resource access, we have already discussed. Access resource that are heavy to instantiate. Example, kind of source report. Access protected resources. So, in this talk, I will be looking more at protective proxy in terms of implementation. So, how do you implement a protective proxy pattern? First is you have to define the subject. What do you want to protect? And provide an interface for that. Second part, so this is an interface. So let us say you want to protect how you are going to respond to an elevator request to executing a command. You will create a command which has only one method, execute. Define the real subject. Now, here comes the play. The real subject would actually implement the subject in such a way that it executes the command. Last is the defining the proxy. It implements the same subject that real subjects implements, but what it does is that it maintains a reference to a real subject and controls access to the real subject. So when a proxy is created, it will always implement the subject so that the client would never know that it is not accessing the real subject. So how does it look like in practice? So this is how you define a subject. You provide a interface. In this case, you want to run a command. Second, you create the real subject. So this is the class that would actually implement the command, which implement the interface, which the proxy will help the client work with. So in this case, it just says that for brevity, it will just print out that this particular command is executed. So what does the proxy does in this case? It also implements from the interface. However, what it does is that it actually checks certain things like whether the user is admin. How does it check? You pass the username and password. If the user have these attributes, it sets that it is an admin. So it can execute certain other commands that is not executable by non-admin users. And then it creates a reference to the actual subject. So real subject is the executor. So it adds a reference to that executor in this. Now, when you look at and what then it does is it overrides the run command by itself. It checks whether user is admin. If it is admin, then it calls the run command of the real subject. Otherwise, it checks what kind of command is being done. In this case, it is remove. We are just so let's say that only admin can run RM on a system. So it will check whether RM is there. Is the command RM? If it is command is RM and the user is not admin, raise an exception saying that this cannot be done by a non-admin user. Otherwise, execute the command. So what proxy is doing is that it is essentially implementing the run command method of the subject, but adding extra features in such a way that the actual run command is executed only when after doing certain checks. How does the client use it? Client will just call the proxy and pass the passwords. Since this is not correct, when client tries to run ls minus ltr, it works fine because it doesn't need the elevated privileges. But when the client tries to run this rm minus rf, you get an exception. The main thing to remember here is that client does not have direct access to the executor. Client might not even know that there is an executor working behind the proxy. So that completes the discussion on the structural patterns. Let's go to Q&A.
Yeah, let wait for few minutes, few seconds. If you have any question, please post it in the chat, everyone. Yeah, I guess we don't have any questions.
Wow, that's interesting. Either the talk has been really good or it has been really bad.
I actually liked it. I could have I can relate to it because I have seen that kind of coding patterns, but I was not aware that that particular thing is called proxy pattern or something like that. So yeah, this was
That is good
nice.
to know.
Yeah. Okay. That's it, I guess. Thank you for the great talk, and hope to see the next one in the series, right?
Yeah, there will be next would be behavioral patterns.
Nice. Awesome. If anyone has any question, they can always reach out to AP on the GitHub issue where you can basically post a specific question to this talk. And yeah, yeah, people are asking if you can share the PPT and link or something.
Yeah,
So
I would create the PDF of it and share the link.
yeah, you can share it on the GitHub issue
Yeah,
we have,
yeah,
so we can take
yeah.
it from
I will
there.
do that.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome, awesome. So yeah, let's move to the next section we have. So thank you for joining in, everyone. So we will be moving to a chat room where you can discuss things. You can join there. You can talk about if you have any question, other Python related questions, anything. So that link is in the description of this video. And yeah, few end notes. Let me just open those. Awesome. So if you can follow us on the Twitter, which is twitter.com/pythonpune. We also have our own website, which is pythonpune.in. You can get all the newsletters, all the meetup description, all the PPTs and everything from there. We are also on Freenode IRC, which is #pythonpune. So you can chat with all the members there as well. So yeah, let's move to the chat room. We can talk there as well. I will be posting all these links in the description, in the chat of this YouTube live.